Well, good morning, everyone. This is Chris Dew with eOne, and I want to welcome you to our session today, where we're going to be talking about accessing historical dynamics GP data right inside of Acumatica interface and everything that entails. So welcome to the call, everyone. Just to get started, we'll get into just a quick little agenda here. And so we'll start out with discussing a few terms that we'll be using today and kind of the overall migration strategy that we have around moving our Dynamics GP information. And then we're going to get into most of the time is going to be spent, the meat of this conversation is really going to be on how we can actually go about moving that data and viewing it right inside of Acumatica. So let's jump right in. Two terms, again, we're going to discuss here are around Azure Data Lakes and then the Popdock Data Lake upload tool. So the first one, Azure Data Lake. Again, if this is a term that you're not familiar with, this is basically something that's going to be in the customer's Azure account. It is, while we call it a data lake, which hardly anybody knows what that means, it's really a storage account in Azure, and it is just simply a way of storing a lot of unstructured information. So what that means is we can have a CSV file sitting next to an XML file, sitting next to a JPEG, sitting next to a PDF, sitting next to Excel. It doesn't much matter, right? It's unstructured data that can be placed out there. And one of the key tenets of the data lake is that it's a really cost-effective storage mechanism. So that for an offering like this, being able to store some data that, again, you maybe are only going to use for the next 7 years or maybe 3 years, or whatever it may be, that however long you need to access that history, it's a really cost-effective way of doing it. And again, we've written some optimization on how we can get that data out of there in the most efficient way possible. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about, and again, we're actually referencing the Azure Data Lake that we just talked about from the start there, but the Popdock Data Lake upload tool is going to be utilized to take the information from Dynamics GP, and it is going to move it, basically extract it out of GP, and is then going to send it to the data lake and make that data available for us to use, again, inside of Popdock, and then obviously embedded inside of Acumatica. In this case is what we're talking about today. So there's a quick little terms thing that we're talking about. All right, so what is the overall migration strategy, right? If you're on GP today, we have a ton of people that have different strategies on how they want to access this historical data. So again, for some people, that I'd say probably 90-some% of the people are using an on-premise type of solution. And so we're basically, you have a way that you're maintaining that server today on site, and we need to move that from your on-premise to the cloud into that storage. Another way is, again, some people are, maybe have put a virtual machine inside of Azure and are hosting it up there. It's still kind of an on-premise scenario. It's just, it's going from Azure to another Azure resource, but we have those kinds of things in there. And again, we used to have require, I should say, a gateway to basically connect to the GP data securely, but we're going to get into that a bit more. That the new way that we've introduced this makes it a lot easier and more efficient, and I'd say even more secure. Again, we do realize some people are looking at maybe not retiring their SQL Server, and so there is ways that you can do that with Popdock. We can access that data directly if you need it. And again, some people will actually even just move that SQL Server, might move it to an Azure SQL if that's a scenario. So we realize there's a lot of different ways. I even have one other way, right? There's some people that have chosen to host it maybe with kind of a dedicated hosting company, or one that's built some extra stuff around it. Like one of them comes to mind is like Power GP Online. And so if you have that mechanism as well, we can still extract that data, and we can, again, archive it somewhere else if needed. So let's get into really how do we do this. So I think one of my favorite ways of diving into this is let's show you what this looks like right inside of Acumatica, and then kind of just build our way back and show you exactly what we did to get that data inside of there. So we're going to dive right into, again, being able to see that history right inside of Acumatica. Again, a few key points here. You're going to have options, right? If you want to see maybe just GP history, if you want to see that somewhere inside of the Acumatica interface, we're going to be able to do that. You maybe have a scenario where you actually need to see the history coming from Dynamics GP and also the live information coming from Acumatica. And so that is another scenario that we can do right inside of Popdock with this tool, is that we can combine that data and give you one list that you don't have to go hunting, all the places to see what came in, this year, last year. We have one place to see all of that history. And then another key area that people will do is that they will want to filter that list down. So I don't want to see all of the records. I only want to see it for this particular customer or this particular vendor or an account. And so we can actually embed this onto anywhere inside of Acumatica, and we can filter it down so we can see only that customer's orders or that vendor's payments or any kind of related information like that. And so that's, to me, that's where there's a lot of value, is really just presenting it very specifically on what history we need to see. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's jump in and let's see some data right inside of the Acumatica interface. Okay, so I'm going to jump right inside of the Acumatica interface here, and what we'll see is when I click on data views, I have a dashboard set up. And so when I open up this dashboard for oh, I got logged out. We'll log back in real quick. Okay, so now that I pulled up this Popdock dashboard, what we'll see is that I have the capability of doing multiple lists. So we're focusing on GP right now. So these are lists that have been, again, pushed to the data lake. This is my GP history. So if we want to pull some account transaction history, for example, we're now doing that. Now, this is kind of interesting, right? We're able to do this for multiple companies. And so we actually have archived not just one company, but I've archived 3 different companies in this case. So you can still do multi-company even though we have archived it to a data lake. And so here we go. We can see now I have the account transactions. I'm able to search across this. I'm still able to do all the fun things, right? If I want to add some additional columns to this, I can do that. We can filter this down, right, with as many filters as we like. So that's a non-issue inside of here. We can do still like the date, probably still one of my favorite things is the date filters that we have, that we don't necessarily have to specify a range between. We can actually do these comparisons and say, hey, you know what, I actually just wanted everything for this quarter. And so that's all I need to do. And now I can save this as a favorite, come back to it, and it's really easy to find just the data that I want. So you can interact with all this data. Again, we can switch from account transactions to, if we wanted to see some payables information, for example. So if I just want to see like payables transactions, I could do that. Or you can see I actually had a favorite on there. I could actually just go to the payments only favorite that I had. So anyway, you can interact with this and make as much or as little history available as you like. And again, like I said, this is basically all that information, but if we wanted to narrow it down and put this onto like the vendor page inside of Acumatica and only show, in this example, Ace Travels payments, we could certainly do something like that as well. Okay. So there's a quick little thing showing you, again, how easy it is to interact with it right inside of the Acumatica interface. But let's talk about how do we actually make all of this happen. So We're going to be getting into the Popdock Data Lake upload tool. The first thing we have to do is we have to connect to that data. So we're going to give you a couple of options to either connect to your smart lists and those favorites and move that to Data Lake, or there's also another option that that I really call the insurance policy, if you will. So let's talk about a couple key points into this. A really big benefit is that this does not require punching a hole into any firewalls or opening up ports on the SQL Server to the internet. This all happens on the customer's network. And so it changes it from, I guess in the past, what's been a pull, right? We're pulling from the on-premise to the cloud, to it's really more of a push. We're saying, hey, everything is happening on the customer's network, and then we're pushing it to the data lake using Popdock. Again, as I just mentioned, it allows us to do all GP lists. Now, what is a list? Smart lists, so all your standard smart lists that are inside of there, those are all there. But if you built a new smart list using Smart List Builder or even Baby Smart List Builder, right, the designer from Microsoft, we can pull any of those lists and pull all that information in. Again, the beautiful part about the lists is these are the fields that your end users are used to seeing, right? They're not the cryptic SQL names for it. They're the same names as you would see inside of Dynamics GP. And so that's a huge benefit for everybody and to be able to see that information. Now, there is another option. Like I said, this is more the insurance policy where it allows us to take the entire database. And so we can say, hey, you know what? I want to archive this database, even if I'm primarily going to be using the lists, I just want to know that just in case if I had to, in an audit, I needed to pull up some data from an additional table, that I could do that right inside of Popdock. So this is a great way of archiving it. And again, for many people, they're looking at turning off that SQL Server, right? No longer maintaining that server, and this is the tool that helps you do that. Okay, so that's kind of connecting to the data, but let's talk about actual moving of the data. So moving those smart lists and favorites to the data lake. Again, maybe just to kind of reiterate, this does run in the customer environment and there's no additional server is needed, right? You don't need to set up a web server for a gateway or anything like this. This is really a tool that you'll see in a second that runs on a machine. It doesn't even have to be run on a server machine. It could run on a regular, workstation on their network. So it doesn't require server power. I would say this though. I mean, if you have a terabyte of data, it's going to be running for a little bit longer than 10 minutes, just because it takes a little while just to work through all that data. And so you need to make sure that it's a machine that's not going to turn off on you as part of that scenario. The second part, right, is moving the data is as fast as possible, right? As fast as we can extract it out of SQL, and then as fast as we can upload it. So this is one thing that we've encountered a few times. Right now, as we worked with some customers, we had somebody that was on a really old, slow SQL server where they had hosted their GP. So it took longer to actually extract that information out. And then the second part is that this was a school that was basically kind of in a remote area, and they had very poor internet access, and so their upload speeds were really slow as well. So what should have probably in their case been maybe a 2-hour process ended up taking many days, just because of the slowness of their environment. So just so that you know that those are kind of the two factors that will determine the length of time it can take. But this tool is really as fast as you can pull data out and as fast as you can upload it. Another part to this is that you have the capability of fixing some errors. So let's say, for example, you had a table that was really huge, and I don't know, let's say someone decided to back up the SQL Server and in the middle of that. And basically you lost access to the SQL Server and it choked on it. Well, you will have the capability of fixing those errors right inside of the product. And I'll show you that in just a second. So let's get right into it. Like I said, we're going to probably spend the heart of our time getting into it here. and showing you how this is done. So instead of going into Popdock, what I'm going to show you right now is this is the Popdock data upload tool. So this is part of the solution. And again, once you log this in, you're going to have some options on whether we want to copy the smart lists, right? That's kind of that first part, the one that you're probably primarily going to use, and then an option to copy the entire database or the tables. So let's start with the smart list option. You're going to be logging into your Popdock account. If you do have multiple accounts, which again, many of our partners do as they're helping out their customers, you'll log into the correct account. So let me do that now. All right, everything was sitting there for a little while. Okay, there we go. The second thing is it's now asking us which data lake that we're connecting to. So this is one that, again, I have already configured inside of Popdock, so I can see all of my data lakes. And then I'm just specifying exactly the count in the container where we're gonna dump all of this data again. So now I connect to that data lake. The final part, right, it's pretty simple here, right? It was just we have to log into our Popdock, we have to connect to a data lake account, that's where we're going to push the data, and then finally saying now on the network that we're on the customer side, we need to pick which version of GP. So you'll see in here we have a whole host of versions, all the way from the 18.5 that just went out to, I think the lowest we have in here is version 9, but everything everywhere in between. So the data I'm happen to point to right now is just the 2018 RTM. You're going to be putting in the credentials locally, right? This is a local connection to the SQL Server. Mine just happens to have this external address, but yours will probably just be like server, SQL Server or something like that. You'll again then put in the port in your Dynamics database. And again, mine is non-standard. Most of you probably have just a Dynamics database. Mine is called GP Dynamics in this case. Finally, we get down to the username. And some people get hung up on this. Mine says SA. That is not necessarily required. What is required is that whatever user you have has to have read access to every database that you're going to be hitting, and every table that you're going to be hitting inside of there. So they have to have read access to that. The other part is that we have to be able to access the sys objects, because we need to find the metadata for all those tables and views. So that is one thing that we do, is that we're making sure that as we create these lists that we have the proper metadata to say that this is a date field, this is a numeric field, whatever. Okay, so now we're connected to GP. Once we do this, what we're going to get back is we're going to get back all the companies. And this is where, again, we wanted to give you choices, because we have somebody that has like 75 companies and they were only moving 50 of them. For whatever reasons, maybe some were test companies, some were some organizations that maybe they had merged, over the years. Whatever the reasoning may be, if you do not want to move that history, you don't have to. So in my case here, I'm going to choose to get rid of this one. I don't really have any data in this threes company, and I'm going to utilize this for this demonstration. So now that I've chosen those two companies, now I'm going to get all the lists. And like I said, all of the smart lists that are coming from your GP system are in here. But there's also some interesting ones, right? That is obviously not a standard list. That is one that was built with Smart List Builder. Or again, if we look at some of these other ones here, I have some EQA lists, right? These are ones that were built with Smart List Builder. I think I have one or two lists that are built with the designer from Microsoft. But you get to choose which of these lists that you want. I'm going to go ahead and start this process. You'll see, because I'm running this in a couple of companies, that is actually, 306 lists are going to be placed up there. Now, it's kind of interesting. It cranked through a first couple, but now we're going into the account transactions, which in my example, I think I have 300 some thousand rows in there. And you can see we're just over halfway right now, but it took a few more seconds than a lot of the tables that only had a smaller amount of data. But just showing you that this list, which like I said, there you go. That took, what, 20 seconds maybe to to get that data, and now it's starting the process of actually uploading everything inside of there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, just really briefly to show you, while we're going to let some of this run. Like I said, this is the longest running list because it has the most records in my sample data. But I'm going to go jump inside of Popdock now and show you a little more behind the scenes of what's going on. And so if I go inside of here, and if I go inside of the data lake connector that I have, here we go, this ADL GP. What we'll be able to see inside of here is that, again, it has actually brought in those companies. So I can, even though it's a data lake now instead of the database for GP, we still have that concept of being able to switch companies and show data across multiple companies. If we look inside of here, here's the lists that are starting to come in now. So you'll see that everything's brought in. So this is that big one that it was working on, right? The account transactions. This is all our GL history inside of here. And so you'll see that it's not a dumb process, right? It brought in all this information, and so it brought in the string fields as needed. It brought in, numbers, currencies, some drop-down lists, so all those predefined document status, right? If we open up this drop-down list, I should be able to see that, there we go. If it's a 0, 1, or 2, we know it's open history or work. So just some really handy things like that allow us to actually utilize that data. And even we have some of these that have a summary, right? So like this credit amount has been summarized by default. And again, you can change how you want this behavior. You can change other fields to summarize them or count them or whatever, depending on the data type. But just to show you that this is basically what this list is doing inside of here. And again, even if you wanted to have additional lists, so these are those standard smart lists that looks like must be just about done inside of here, is that we can actually go, and if we wanted to add one of those tables for, oh, you know what? I actually haven't ran that part yet. Okay, we'll come back to that because that's going to be the next thing we're going to talk about. Here's one last thing I will show you, though, is that we talked briefly about being able to combine data from my Acumatica connector with my Azure Data Lake connector and make one list that has the history and the new system all in one area without having to hunt all over. And so this is something that we would call a merge list. So right inside of this custom list, I could say, hey, grab this. Let's call it sales transactions, right? If we were pulling like the line items from the GP history data, and then also all the line items from the orders or invoices inside of Acumatica, we could have one list that had all the information. And then more appropriately, we might filter that down by customer, right? So that I only see the invoices for a particular customer, or again, on the payable side, right? Maybe it's only for a particular vendor. All right, so I wanted to show you kind of some of the behind the scenes there. Looks like there's a few more things that are still going in here. I think most of this now, what we're gonna see is I don't have much set up in this 4-iron foundry company. I only had a couple pieces of data in there. So what it's gonna be doing is it's actually gonna be skipping most of them because they're empty. There's no data in there. So this is kind of handy because it gives us kind of a running total of like how many are remaining. It tells us, which ones have failed. So we have 5 or 6. Now we're getting a couple more failures in here. And here's this last status called skipped. Now, what does that mean? This basically says if there is no data in that particular list, we're not going to move it to the data lake. We're not just going to dump an empty list in there, an empty file sitting up there. We're basically going to skip it because there's actually no data to report on for that particular company. All right, so it looks like this last part should take just a few more seconds, and then I want to talk about how do we actually work with those errors. So if we go ahead and look at this, we can actually see, here we go, we have Oh, you know what? I ran this earlier. Okay, yep, I ran this earlier, and it looks a little funny right now. Um, but basically, what would be able to see is like I could sort by status, so I could see here's all the ones that were skipped, or here's the ones that had actually failed in this example, and I could even see, why this one failed. So this one looks like I have a bad calculated field inside of here. If I look at some of these ones, that's the only one from the Fabricam company that failed. But if we look at these ones, these are coming from my 4-iron foundry. And all of these lists basically have some information like coming from extender, or again, looks like that's that bad calculation again. This one is obviously, again, coming from some extender data, and I don't even have extender installed in that particular GP company. So we're getting some legitimate errors. But if you found something, and let's say you went and fixed that smart list, right? So let's say like I had a bad calculated field, and I went, oh, yep, I guess we never went back and fixed that. So change that calculated field and in the smart list, and then I wanted to retry, I could just check this and say, hey, we're going to retry that one here, and we'll retry it now in this company as well. And then it would allow me to rerun. And so now it's only going to do the 2 lists, right? Instead of all of the lists, I'm able to now see it. Again, I didn't fix anything, so I still have the same issue as before. But I just want to let you know that you can do that right inside of this interface. Okay, the last part, what I want to show you is that, again, we can hit run again, but this time, instead of moving just the lists that we want, the smart lists, I can flip this over and we can do the whole database. So again, it will have me log into my account one more time. I have way too many accounts. That's my problem. Okay, it'll allow me to pick my data lake one more time, and then we'll pick my GP version one more time. But here's what's going to change. This time, instead of getting companies or lists, all we're going to get is which databases we want. So again, if you only wanted to move that particular database and the Dynamics database, you could do that, and then you just hit run, and then it goes through. This time it's going to move, 2,000 tables. So I'm going to skip that one. I'm not going to do the whole database for now, but I just want to let you know that you have both options. And then once you do that, it will actually be available to add to Popdock if you want to see any of those tables displayed. Okay, so let's go back and we'll just kind of review some of the points we talked about here today. What this tool and solution allows us to do is securely connect to your Dynamics GP data, right? Because it's now running on premise and pushing it to an Azure Data Lake. It allows us to quickly and easily move it, right? So there's not a lot of configuration. You don't have to configure a special server or anything like that. We're able to quickly connect to the data. And then again, it's a really efficient process for both extracting the data out of your GP system and then upload it to the data lake. And then the last part, right, is really the key to this whole thing. Is it's one thing to extract it out, but now I need to be able to access it. And so we started the day off with that, just showing you that we can basically make as many lists as we want available inside of Acumatica and something like a dashboard there, or we can. I didn't dive into it, but we could embed it on a customer or a vendor or an employee or a project or an inventory item, whatever made sense, right? We could see whatever history or even combined history and new data. So there you go. There's a quick little introduction to this solution, and I'm really excited about it for the people that we have that are moving from Dynamics GP to Acumatica. I think this is an awesome way to be able to still see all the historical data without compromising, their implementation. So let's jump right in. Let's look at any questions we have. So I would encourage you, if you do have some questions, to use the questions pane of the GoToWebinar, and we'll get through as many of these as we can today. So fire away. Okay, looks like we got a couple in there. Cool. So the first one I have today is how far back can we go for GP versions? I briefly showed you the screen starting with, we have the most current version, the 18.5 for GP, but we can go, or I should say this, we've gone all the way back to version 9 of GP, which is, I don't know, 17 years ago, something like that, when that one came out. But there's probably, like, if you do find a customer that's on even a slightly older version than that, there's a possibility that we can still access that same version as well, and maybe we have to deal with a couple different field changes that GP had at the time, but we should be able to help and assist in any of those types of scenarios. Okay, we got another one. Okay. Does this tool work with other products like SL or Nav or even QuickBooks? So yeah, let me tackle that. So what I showed you today, right, the focus of this webinar was just extracting data out of GP with the Popdock Data Lake upload tool. But you're absolutely right. We have SL in that drop-down list, and then we have some plans to very shortly to make it available for both Nav and also SQL. Like, so you'd be able to extract any kind of SQL data in whatever legacy system, on-premise system that they want, and move that to a data lake. So that's coming. QuickBooks is probably a little bit further off, so that was mentioned in there too. That's probably something that's going to happen in the new year. But we do have plans for making this the tool to, again, get whatever historical data and allow you to move it to the data lake and then access it wherever you need to see that data. Again, and wherever that is in whatever system. Okay. Oh, this almost looks like related to the last question. Okay. Can I display other data from other systems in Acumatica? Yeah, absolutely. Again, we've been focused on data that we can move to an Azure Data Lake. Again, like I said, from GP or one of those other systems, like I said, SL or something like that. But you can move, well, let me say it this way. You don't even need to move everything to a data lake to access it inside of Acumatica. We can have live connections to e-commerce systems like Shopify or Magento or WooCommerce or things like that, or we could have live connections to CRM systems, whether it be on the Microsoft side, Microsoft CE, or it could be Salesforce, or any number of those other CRMs that are out there. So we can pull all of that data and display that right inside of Acumatica and make it look and feel like a native solution to report off of that data. So absolutely, same kind of scenario. It's just we don't necessarily need to move it to a data lake to see that. Okay, good question. Good questions. Okay, another one. How much does Azure Data Lake cost? Okay, that's kind of a wide open question. And let me give you some guidelines for this. For most people that we've seen that have under 100 gigabytes of data that they're storing out there, and let's say you're just accessing it, less than 10,000 times a month. For most of those people, what we're seeing is that you would be paying way less than $20 a month for that Azure Data Lake storage. So it's pretty cost effective. And even just to let you know, in 1 year after heavy testing and a ton of migrations that we had done, primarily on the GP side of things, but some SL stuff as well, it cost us $5 for the year. So as you can see that it's a pretty cost-effective storage mechanism, and it really you shouldn't have to worry about it too much. Okay, it looks like a follow-up on that. How much does the Popdock Data Lake upload tool cost? Okay, that actually is there's no additional cost. If you have a Popdock subscription, that is included, right? We'll make that available to you, and you can run this migration again as many times as you like. There's a lot of people like to run it in test, for example. So you might run some test data up there as you're going through UAT and just making sure that your end users can see that history. And then maybe when you're finally ready to cut over from GP to Acumatica, that you can say, hey, we're going to run this one more time to get all the latest history in there, and then we can, at some point in time, shut off our SQL that we no longer need. Okay, that is the last question that I have in there. So unless there's a last minute question that comes in, I want to just thank everyone for your time today, and hopefully you learned something. And if you do have some additional questions, I'd encourage you to go to sales@eonesolutions.com, and we will get you to the right people to answer any of those questions. So thank you for attending, and we'll talk to you all soon.